Okay, folks, I think we're ready to start. So good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Albrecht Earth Day Lecture. My name is Pat Market. I'm the director of the School of Natural Resources. I have just a few opening remarks and then I'll be turning things over to our moderator, Dr. Kristen Vam. Dr. William Albrecht was a soil microbiologist in the Department of Soils at the University of Missouri from 1919 to 1958. He was president of the Soil Science Society of America in 1938 and also a fellow of both the Soil Science Society of America and the American Society of Agronomy. He was internationally recognized for pioneering work in soil organic matter properties, nitrogen fixation, and his progressive insight on the relationships of soil status to animal and human nutrition and health. He recognized the importance of calcium as a nutrient in plant growth and health, not limited to use as a soil amendment to adjust acidity. Dr. Albrecht also developed many biological assays that are precursors to today's soil health indicator measurements. He investigated soil management practices to maintain, improve, and restore soil organic matter, practices that were based on studies at Sanborn Field, the longest continuously cultivated agricultural research site in the United States. The soil sample from which aureomycin, an antibiotic used in medicine, was collected while Dr. Albrecht was director of Sanborn Field. We're grateful for the generosity of the late Dr. Carl Ferguson, whose gift in honor of Professor Albrecht allows Mizzou to celebrate Dr. Albrecht's legacy during our annual Earth Day lecture. Anne Perret is the granddaughter of William A. Albrecht, and I believe she is with us today. We extend a special welcome to her. And now to introduce our guest speakers, Dr. Kristen Vam, soil scientist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agriculture Research Service. Kristen, take it away.
All right, thank you, Dr. Market, and thank you to our distinguished guests for joining us today. I'd also like to thank Patty Quackenbush and Cindy Greenwood for their help organizing today's lecture. We have an exciting program lined up for today, and during the lecture, you may submit questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I will read your questions to the speakers following their presentation. Today's lecture is Indigenous Reciprocal Relationships with the Land and Soil, featuring Dr. Shade-Johnson, citizen of the Cherokee Nation and assistant professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia in the Department of English and the School of Visual Studies Digital Storytelling Program, and Ed Smith of Osage Descent. He's passionate about the resurgence of traditional food systems and food sovereignty. He established and managed an indigenous food garden for 10 years and has helped several tribes and American Indian community members establish their own traditional gardens. All right, Dr. Shade-Johnson.
Thank you. Osio Jaquetta Shade-Johnson Dagwado. Hello, my name is Jaquetta Shade-Johnson. I'm joining from Oklahoma. So now that I'm talking, my slides aren't working. Here we are. So I'm joining from Oklahoma, and so I wanted to first acknowledge that I'm sitting on what has recently been affirmed as Cherokee reservation lands through the U.S. Supreme Court decision in McGirt v. Oklahoma, some of the best news to come out of 2020, in my opinion. Let me also offer acknowledgement of the space where we would be gathering under normal circumstances at the University of Missouri campus. So we gather here virtually on this colonial occupied territory, which was the ancestral home and shared landscape to the Wajaje or Osage, Ocheti Saquin, the seven council fires known as the Great Sioux Nation, the Othakwa and Meskwaki, Sauk and Fox, Kickapoo, Neachi, Missouri, Jouer, or the Oto, and Bixoje, the Iowa and Quapaw peoples, as well as the Peoria, Kaskaskia, and Cahokia peoples of the Illini Confederation, and to the ancient cultures of the Folsom, Hopewell, and Clovis people. During forced removals and relocations, my tribe, the Cherokee, along with the Delaware and Shawnee peoples, to name just a few, traveled through this region. Once a significant indigenous contact zone, no federally recognized tribes remain in the state of Missouri, though many tribes are represented in the peoples of this area. I'd like to take a moment also to honor the small Native population, the small Native student population here at the University of Missouri, and the work that they're doing to benefit their tribal communities. One vital way of honoring this land as Indigenous, particularly at a land-grant institution, is to help us build structures of support for Indigenous students, faculty, and knowledges. So thank you for joining us here and honoring this space as native land. So I'm glad that you're here, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day, especially at this point of the semester, to join us for the Albrecht Earth Day lecture. And thanks to Kristen, PQ, Cindy, and the folks at the School of Natural Resources for inviting us to share with you our perspectives on Indigenous reciprocal relationships with the land and soil. Ed and I are sharing this time, so our approach is that I'm going to begin by offering a theoretical framework for understanding Indigenous perspectives of land, earth, and soil, and then Ed will share with you what that can look like in practice. So you may be wondering why I'm here, why an English professor is speaking at an event that honors the work of the late William Albrecht, a celebrated soil researcher. I am not a scientist, though I once hoped to be. Instead, I followed my other interest, the humanities, and my work is in rhetoric and writing, and I'm situated in cultural rhetorics, specifically Indigenous rhetorics, and I do this work by constellating relationships. Some of this research focuses on Indigenous foodways, specifically mushrooms, which I'm showing you here on the screen, and hen-of-the-woods mushrooms in particular. They're also called maltakelgrifola frondosa in the Latin, but they are a Cherokee delicacy, which we call Wishi. So my research in Wishi is connected to Indigenous frameworks of land, land-based knowledge, and environment. I have a little picture on the right-hand side, which is with our Cherokee syllabary language for Wishi, which is the syllabary representation, and a drawing. The picture in the middle is my dad preparing the Wishi that he has gathered for us to eat. So that's just my little orientation to land-based knowledges. I also work in words and in languaging and in meaning making, what we say, write, and do. As I was preparing for this talk, for this audience who is likely far better versed in soil systems than me, I began to realize that much of the languaging around Indigenous ecological knowledge and Indigenous perspectives of the land are often framed in fairly abstract terms. So with this in mind, what I'm offering you today is an orientation to Indigenous connections to the earth, land, and soil, in which I aim to demystify and clarify this worldview. In terms of structure, I'm looking at the work of Cree scholar Sean Wilson, who contributes in his seminal book, Research as Ceremony, an Indigenous research paradigm built on the 4 R's, which are respect, responsibility, relationality, and reciprocity, which we'll get to later. But he also articulates a research paradigm in which ontology, epistemology, methodology, and axiology are interconnected. So I'm currently teaching a course on research methodologies, Indigenous research methodologies, and there are several excellent ones that are available. And so I'm going to sort of skip over that, but I'm happy to talk about those later on in the questions if you'd like. But there's a larger gap, however, in scholarship around Indigenous ontologies, epistemologies, and axiologies of land and soil. So I wanted to situate my talk today within those categories. Please do keep in mind that the Indigenous worldviews that I'm offering for you, like Indigenous peoples, are incredibly diverse. There are many tribal nations and tribal communities on this continent that we call Turtle Island and across the globe. We are not a monoculture, but instead we have many, many ways of knowing and practicing our cultures. What I share with you is merely an overview of concepts from Indigenous studies, which are shared by many cultural communities, but certainly not all, as a bridge for understanding. So I wanted to begin with Indigenous ontologies of the land, which Wilson describes as a belief in the nature of reality, our way of being, and what we believe is real in the world. So in my first slide, I'm sharing with you a comparison of settler and Indigenous perspectives of the land. And as you can see here, on the left-hand side, I have the settler perspective situated in extractive perspectives, and where the land produces profit through commodification and extraction. And then conversely, Indigenous frameworks are based in relationality, where the land produces relations. So renowned Potawatomi biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer elaborates that in the settler mind, land was property, real estate, capital, or natural resources. But to our people, it was everything. Identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library. the source of all that sustained us. Our lands were where our responsibility to the world was enacted, sacred ground. It belonged to itself. It was a gift, not a commodity, so it could never be bought or sold. But what does this mean? What does our relations and non-human kinfolk mean? Oops, I'm jumping ahead. So instead, first let me dispel the romanticized Disney Pocahontas trope of dancing raccoons and talking trees that happen to speak English. When we say relations and non-human kinfolk, that's not exactly what we mean. Instead, Cherokee philosopher Brian Burkhart explains, I see myself as an agent, not an active agent in relation to passive things, but an agent among agents. This can mean that I, as an agent, can be in relation with another agent, the part of the earth that we call soil. Kinship offers us the context for understanding our relationships. In this kinship I'm describing, I'm related to the soil, and in relation, the soil is alive. To maintain the relationship, I must be a good relative to the soil through respect, and in return, it may show me respect through reciprocity. And in this sense, giving and receiving are agents acting in respect in this kinship of reciprocity. So without both working together, the relationship becomes one-sided, unreciprocal. And I imagine that we all know from life experience how well such relationships like that turn out. So I really wanted to situate that for us. As I move on to Indigenous epistemologies of the land, I remind you what I had listed on one of the earlier slides, that epistemology is how we think about our reality. To build upon the concept of our relations that I just described, let me contextualize that for you through an Indigenous epistemology. The concept of non-human kinfolk, or non-human relations is sometimes called animacy. With my background in writing studies, I'm deeply drawn to Robin Kimmerer's description here of the grammar of animacy, in which she frames the aliveness for us of our non-human relatives. To be a hill, to be a sandy beach, to be a Saturday are all possible verbs in a world where everything is alive. Water, land, and even a day. The language a mirror for seeing the animacy of the world, the life that pushes through all things, through pines and nuthatches and mushrooms. This is the language I hear in the woods. This is the language that lets us speak of what wells up all around us. For Kimmerer, it's an issue of translation. English doesn't have the words for expressing a respect for animacy. She explains that in English, you're either human or a thing. Our grammar boxes us in by the reducing of a non-human being to an it. To illustrate that concept, Kimmerer shares the example that we never refer to a member of our family, our grandmother, or indeed any sort of person as it. That, of course, would be deeply irrespectful, unrespectful. Grammar, she argues, is just the way that we chart relationship in language. Maybe it also affects our relationships to each other. Maybe a grammar of animacy could lead us to whole new ways of living in the world. Other species as sovereign people, a world with a democracy of species, not a tyranny of one, with moral responsibility to water and wolves, and with a legal system that recognizes the standing of other species. It's all in the pronouns, she says. So I wonder, what might that world look like? What possibilities does that offer for us? What sort of world does that make? And as I move into the Indigenous axiologies of the land, Wilson defines axiology as a set of morals or ethics. And so here's where I return to Wilson's 4 R's: respect, responsibility, relationality, and reciprocity, which helps to give us a set of ethics to work from. These are the codes of Indigenous relation building and relationality. Brian Burkhart teaches us that all my relations are sacred. They all carry the same weight, and none of them can be ignored. What this means is that we don't have relationships to ecosystems as a collection of individuals, but instead we have relationships to ecosystems, as a collective of individuals, but instead we have relationships to ecosystems as individuals. We can have many kinship relations with many relatives, a plant, an animal, a mountain made of its own relations of dirt, soil, rocks, plants, animals, a fungal network. The codes of respect to these different kinship relations depends on the relationships and the network of relationships involved in the kinships. Kinship, therefore, is not an automatic thing, but instead it's something that Burkhardt describes as that must be established within a local community of beings. So these could be animals, rocks, trees. Humans must find and establish their own kinship relationships with those beings in order for the community to come together in a bottom-up unity. It's in this understanding, or epistemology then, of how we are related to things that shape our reality, or our ontology, and that inform the codes, or axiology, of research in native land-based knowledge. So Vine Deloria Jr. Describes Western worldviews as incomplete in his work with Daniel Wildcat, who works just over the Kansas border at Haskell Indian Nations University. Deloria and Wildcat call it an irreconcilable duality between facts and values, a scientific study that purposely ignores meaning and value as part of its mission to seek out only the facts, which therefore limits its own completeness of knowledge construction. Where am I at here? Okay. Burkhardt argues that native science is the tool for understanding this deep relationality, which is the connectedness and relatedness of and between things. Native science is very different than Western science, however, in large part because of the sense that one can never be out of relation, that knowledge is always kept in locality. The manner in which one goes about finding knowledge is in relation. Likewise, Kimmerer acknowledges that science can be a way of forming intimacy and respect with other species that's rivaled only by the observations of traditional knowledge holders. It can be a path to kinship. She explains that doing science with awe and humility is a powerful act of reciprocity with the more than human world. I hope that what I've shared with you today is generative. I hope that it offers you a framework for understanding how the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives in science, soil, and land-based research can help us to understand this earth more completely and can help us to build reciprocal kinships with all of our relations. Like Kimmerer, I listen, longing for the day when we can hear the land give thanks for the people in return. Thank you. Wado. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on over to Ed. Would you like me to leave the Sean Sherman picture up? Would that be helpful?
Sure. Sean's a good-looking guy. We can leave him up there. Thank you so much for that, and for such a good acknowledgement. And since Dr. Shade-Johnson won't do it, I'm going to plug her class, because you guys definitely, you all need to take that Indigenous methods class. I don't care what you're studying, it will benefit you to see whatever it is you're doing in another light is going to benefit whatever field you're in. I often talk about that. I was an adjunct professor at a community college here in Kansas, and that was one of the things that I talked to my students about, was that it really expands your view. It brings a lot of diversity to whatever field you're in. So you all have electives that you need to take. If it's not in your specific field, so take her course.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And my daughter goes to MU, so I'll be talking to her about taking your course too. So that said, we started with theory, and then I'm, for lack of a better word, the grassroots guy. I like to get my hands dirty. I have a graduate degree. I have a master's degree in American Indian Studies, but I'll tell you, I have a certificate in sustainable agriculture, and I wish I would have, and I did them backwards. I got the master's degree, and then I got the certificate, and I probably could have saved myself a lot of money. I really, that certificate in sustainable ag has really impacted my life a lot. A lot more, to be frank. But it led me a lot of places. The combination led me in a lot of places, working with various communities, American Indian communities, here in Kansas, and then back home. Well, I say back home, but I live in my homelands. I was born and raised in Missouri, and in Kansas, where our Osage people are from, and then in Oklahoma. And so I get to work. I have the extreme privilege to be able to work with our tribe has a garden, and they've really expanded that operation with some of the COVID money that they received, big time. I just came back 4 weeks ago and couldn't believe all they've done with that. And so very happy there with that, and for the opportunity to be able to be a part of it from far away. And so I can talk a little bit about that and what I do. So food sovereignty has a lot of faces in American Indian communities. It can take shape, like Dr. Shade-Johnson said, we're very diverse people, and our foodways are also very diverse, because the Americas are enormous, and typically we talk about North America, but then we're also talking about Canada, Alaska, and then all the way down to Argentina when we speak about American Indians. And so there's a lot of peoples that encompasses, and a lot of land, a lot of relationships with food sources, whether that's plants or animals. And so when we get into agriculture, we tend to think of, plants sometimes, but we're also talking animals too. And in modern times, tribes are having livestock, and it's not just cattle. We're talking elk, deer, ranching of those things, fisheries, shellfish, managing shellfish beds, things like that on the coastal areas. There's a lot going on that speaks to some of the traditional relationships, and what I kind of have coined as Indigenous forest management in some areas, where we didn't necessarily plant things, but we kind of took care of things. And my camera's doing something weird here. And so that's something that I have worked with some urban communities here in the Kansas City area, and surrounding areas, working with folks in this area to, especially because we're in an urban area and people don't have land, own land. And so, but there's public lands here, and a lot of the traditional foods in this area are still here. So we go around and teach people to forage, to recognize those things, and then to build those relationships again. Nurture those areas. We go out and, you know, clean up land. And sometimes it's parks, sometimes it's just greenways along streams, and make sure that the food that is growing there has what it needs, best possible chances of growing, but then also to not bring too much attention to anyone else. So we're not out there mulching things and stuff like that, but a lot of times when the creeks flood, there's natural mulch. There's sticks that are left, small sticks that are left when it floods and everything else. And so we do spread it around, but to an untrained eye, it just looks like it's left there. But, you know, we're picking up plastics and things like that, and cleaning. And we teach people about responsible foraging. To, you know, nature needs stuff too, and the animals need stuff too. And so you don't go and just clean out everything. You're taking seeds, so things need to be left so for the next generation of that plant. And we talk about the relationships with those plants, because for my people, something that I pass along is, you know, this one of our favorite foods is the pawpaws. And so and down in Oklahoma, they even tease us and they call it Osage candy. And so sometimes, and so, but ironically, they don't really grow on our reservation. There's actually kind of like a little loop that goes around our area in Oklahoma that, and just, there's just a little small area in around Tulsa that's where those pawpaws grow. That's close to our reservation, but after that, that just kind of carves out the natural area where pawpaws are. And last year I sent 100 seeds down to our farm for them to plant, because our tribal farm is next to a creek, and that's where they like to be planted at. And so they planted all of them. So I don't know how many of them will make it, but they planted 100 trees. And so I was really excited to hear that. But I mail them back home because they grow so well here in Kansas. But we talk about leaving seeds. Sometimes I just grow trees. I'll keep seed from here and grow trees, and I'll bring them when I go back to Oklahoma to visit. I bring them with me and just give them as gifts. People think that's great. They can have their own pawpaw tree at home, or two, because they need a partner, and that's some knowledge that they need to have, is that they have to cross-pollinate. And so those are the kind of relationships that you need to be aware of, and to know that food, and it's something from their homeland too. So that's something that they get excited about, as I say, hey, these are from our homelands before we were removed. So they get excited, and we talk about the fact that you know, this, you know, we're the descendants of our people, and these trees are the descendants of the trees that fed our people. And so that's the kind of relationships that we talk about with some of these traditional foods. And it gets even deeper when you talk about things like corn that literally would not exist without human influence. You know, that something like that came from grass, and that was developed over time. And, you know, if people quit existing, corn would stop eventually. And so we do that with several plants. There's wild plums, and I actually drive to Columbia to get plums. Can't find them here. And so here where I work in this non-for-profit in Kansas City that serves Native people, in our front lobby, we're not serving anyone right now. And so it's a greenhouse right now. And there's 100 plum trees in the lobby that we grew from seeds that we got from a plum tree in Columbia. And we're going to plant those around Kansas City to bring them back. And then I took 50 of them down to, we had 50 more, and I took 50 of them down to our reservation 4 weeks ago in Oklahoma, and they were thrilled to have those. So they're going to have an orchard for those. And then we just started the persimmons that I had found some groves here in town, and so did the same thing. We cleaned the seeds, and we always have that conversation about, you know, who was here, what was going on, and since we have an intertribal community, we like to share stories of who, you know, what did you use this for? How did you process it? A lot of our stories, our Osage folks lost, like how this came to be, and stuff like that, unfortunately. And so it's really nice for me as an individual to kind of hear some of the other people's stories. And we really try to make sure that they, you know the origin of that and keep that, so that we don't get into a intertribal or a kind of a pan-Indian origin of this story, to keep that focus of that. And then we have a seed bank, and so that's important. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me over that phone? Okay. And so we have a seed bank that we do as well, that people can get seeds from their tribe, and then we'll, you know, usually just get a few, and so we try to grow them out and make it larger. And so if people in the area, you know, that are from the same tribe want to grow food from home, and it's available, we try to mentor them of, you know, hey, that'll grow here, that's great, or, you know, you don't have a chance, like that's not going to make it here in Kansas. We really work with them to try to do that, to kind of get those in some ways comfort foods, but in other ways I think of them as kind of spiritual foods, really, that they can kind of recharge sometimes spiritually with some of that stuff. And some of it is for some of the, in Kansas we have 4 tribes, and so the Kickapoo, Sauk and Fox, one band of Sauk and Fox, and Prairie Band Potawatomi, and then the Iowa are here in Kansas, and so they do have some certain foods they use during ceremonies and stuff, and so those can be hard to get. And one of the programs we're trying to do is get more people to grow those foods so that they are more easily available for those things. And then we've got some people coming in to do medicine. And so, and that was last year at this time, there was a few of us that knew some of the respiratory medicines that were here in the area available. And we just, as soon as things started shutting down, we headed out to the woods and the prairie and just started collecting some medicine and keeping it here at the center. And so if people needed something, then we had it available, and we're able to use it. And then other people were sending it back home because it was early in the season. they were sending up north because those medicines weren't growing yet. And so we were sending those things up north to the Dakotas and stuff because they hadn't, early March and stuff, they weren't growing yet. It was still too cold. So those are kind of the grassroots things that you know. Oh, I thought I was on mute for this whole time for a second. I saw that. It's like, you guys are being really nice. So those are some of the ways. One of the things I'm working on is trying to get land to do some more of like our traditional meats, so we can raise those, so we can do like some rabbits and even like deer or elk, because of things like that are coming into the area, like the chronic wasting disease and stuff. We've noticed that people are getting a little skittish even about hunting. And so if we can ranch the deer and the elk, then at least they can be tested, and we can at least be safer with that, even though there's no documented cases of passing on to a human. I know people are getting worried about that, and so that's kind of the next step. And then fish too. I mean, waterways are always our concern now with we have, well, just like you guys. I mean, we're right up the Missouri from you guys, and so we're always connected that way, and worried about pipelines and things like that. And so we've just been trying to teach the kids and some of the families. Got some plans to teach fishing and preservation. Food preservation is another thing to stretch that seasonality. And and that's a big thing, is fresh food's good, but if we can extend that seasonal range for them, to really increase that sovereignty for the community, because we have a food pantry here at this center, but they everybody kept telling us, oh, if you need more food, last year, if you need more food, you just ask, and then we did, and they were like, oh, we don't have any. And that really hit the kind of hit us in the head. It was the what is it, the V8 moment, where it was like, yeah, we I've always been into it, but for the rest of the staff, it was like, yeah, we need something, and it can't just be a few people. We need, as a community, to increase our food security, increase that sovereignty as a community. I mean, a lot of times we face this as tribal communities, we look at it, but so many of us are off reservation, and we don't talk about that so much, but we're living, I don't know the specific number now, but I believe it's in like the 70% range of us that are living off reservation. So last I checked, and so to kind of address that, at least where we have a pocket of Native people like here in Kansas City, then it's something that we can focus on as a community and do something about.
So Ed, this is Kristen Viam. I have some questions from the audience. Are you guys ready to start taking questions, or?
Yeah, I think so, because we both took about 20 minutes, so that would probably be.
Great. So I'm going to read the questions that have been submitted through the Q&A. The first one is for Dr. Johnson. And this is from Dr. Charlie Nyland. So how do the various traditions around land that are held by non-Indigenous people confront or contest or contradict the settler perspective on land and its inhabitants? In what ways are these traditions similar to or different from Indigenous knowledge?
I think we might have lost her.
Did we lose her?
I think so, because her screen kind of froze up there for a minute and then she's not on. I don't
Well,
see.
we'll see. Okay, I'll see if she can get back on. In the meantime, we do have a question specifically for you, Ed, from Charles Ernest. Do you have or know of a successful chestnut reintroduction on a commercial or community scale?
Not for American chestnuts, I don't. I tried to, I was given some of the Asian ones and I had about 15 of them growing in the greenhouse, and I think there was something in the greenhouse because they got about a foot high and then they turned black and just died back. And so I was going to try to grow some because I do a lot of trees and bushes. And so we have a garden, there she is. And so I do a mix. And especially with single people, I try to encourage a mix of kind of half and half of perennials and row crops so that it's manageable for them on a large scale with the weeds and everything. And then they're not having to replant everything every year. And so yeah, so I tried the chestnuts, but they were Asian chestnuts. They weren't, I haven't found anything with American chestnuts yet, or a source anyway.
All right, so let's come back. So Dr. Nyland actually rephrased his question. So what he was wanting to ask Dr. Shade-Johnson is if there are approaches to Western science that are respectful of Indigenous approaches.
I think that there can be, and that's something that, and as somebody in English and writing studies, I'm not as well versed in that as I would like to be, but I do believe that there can be, and so I think it's really about centering methods around recognizing what respectful relationships look like, and I think that Indigenous knowledge can certainly inform Western science.
And so I have a follow-up question to that. So I work for the USDA, and we have a lot of government programs that at least on some level have an intention of interacting, with tribal communities. And so I'm just wondering from your perspective, obviously I have my own thoughts on that, and I'm curious though what you think about the success of those programs or how they could be structured differently to perhaps improve success.
I think that, number one, that's a really great question. So thank you. But I think that it would definitely require a lot of collaboration. I think that there is plenty of space for federal and for institutional systems to work with tribal communities and to work with Indigenous peoples to sort of develop those protocols and methods in ways that are more reciprocal and respectful and sustainable. I know that there have been Indigenous folks that I know who've worked in the USDA in helping to implement some of those programs. And I think it's kind of the complicated thing is that there are so many that it's hard to talk about it in very large general terms for me. But I think that there are certainly ways that it can be done in ways that don't just co-opt Indigenous practices, but instead try to integrate them respectfully and that draw from them without appropriating. So I think there are a lot of different factors involved, but I do believe that such things are possible, and I'm interested in what those possibilities can look like.
All right, well, thank you. Crystal Rain says, I currently have an urban farm in my yard and enjoy trading native seeds and plants with other gardeners. However, I'm also curious about where you'd recommend gardeners purchase their indigenous seeds.
I'm sure Ed has some recommendations, but I do have a couple. I know that nativeseeds.org is a great place, as well as in the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. Those are pretty large seed banks, and they tend to have both indigenous programs that help to protect the seed supply for indigenous communities, as well as non-native supplies that they can sell. So that way you could get seeds that don't deplete native resources. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, I would concur with that, because there's some Missouri local places that maybe I shouldn't name for legal reasons. I don't know. That they have gotten seeds that are questionable. And I will just say that one of them is very popular and is located in mid-Missouri and starts with a B. And we'll stop there. And that, yeah, they've sourced those kind of unscrupulously. And so stay away from them. And so, yeah, so, you know, not just with the plants and stuff, but our communities have relationships with seeds, and we are seed keepers. We've been entrusted both, you know, not just with our communities, but with the seeds. That's a responsibility for that. And so if you go to like the sources that Dr. Shade-Johnson talked about, there's kind of an understanding there that it's okay to share those from those communities because they've been sourced that way. There's a few that are that they will only share with like certain native organization, you know, like some seeds they just say, oh, you have to be a native organization or you have to be a tribal community, and then other seeds they're like, yes, this is fine. We have enough of this stock that we will share with anyone. And so that's, you know, kind of the way we're directed, I guess, with these things. So yeah, those two sites are probably a good bet, and they have a good stock of seeds too. So
I've used both of them even this year, and they've been really great about supplying things. I as a native person, I'm able to access some of their indigenous seed collection, which is sometimes a little bit different, but they also have lots of different varieties of both indigenous and non-indigenous seeds that they do share, as far as like, and I know that sounds kind of weird that they have non-indigenous seeds, but they do have like different varieties of seeds that are maybe not tied to indigenous communities or that maybe are imported, but that they provide just to help make seeds accessible.
All right, we have a quick question. What is the course code for Indigenous methods?
Thanks for asking that. It is currently, it's ENG 8060, and I'm hoping to be able to offer it at least every other year. Right now, I'm currently teaching my first section of it, so we'll see how it goes, but it seems to be going well so far.
Great, thank you. So I have another more philosophical question. You know, I don't know how familiar you are with these so-called new concepts of soil health or regenerative agriculture. And, this is an area in which I do a lot of work, but these concepts are often presented as if they're, new ideas and efforts to, change modern agriculture. And obviously a lot of these concepts are just sort of going back in time. So I'm wondering what goes through your mind when you hear about this discussed, and what your thoughts are on some of these new ideas.
Did you have something to say first, Ed? I thought I saw you have a little moment. Okay. Well, I guess I can go ahead and begin fielding that question, and you're welcome to please jump in. For me, I think that there is a lot of there's quite a few interesting things that are at play in that question. So it's a little bit of a challenge to sort of work through. But the thing is that as I mentioned before, so many Indigenous peoples have so many different connections to the land and forms of relationships with the land and different practices and methods. And so it is likely that, at least here in the Americas, that most everything has been tried before. I would say we have centuries of people with centuries of hundreds of tribal nations, thousands of tribal nations across North and South America, who have been invested in agricultural practices going back through centuries. So it's likely that there are lots of different models that have been tried. And so I think that it's really interesting when things are framed as new, when, as you're suggesting, Kristen, they're likely rooted in some traditional or ancestral practices. So I think that I think there's a lot going on there, and I'm not really sure what to say about it, except that I think it's helpful to be aware of those histories, and to think about what we claim and what we don't claim.
Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Ed, that you'd like to share? That's really more your sphere than mine.
No, I think you kind of hit that one perfect. I mean, yeah, we've been here so long, and there's so many people that just kind of, yeah, I have a hard time thinking that anything's not been done before with that. And that's kind of how my garden started at the college, was that I wanted to show kind of how we used to do things. And so it was really funny. We used to go to the lake and catch all the small sunfish, and we'd throw them in a bucket. And then when it came time to till the garden, turn the soil, we'd throw the fish down. And then the sustainable ag kids would be spraying fish emulsion. And I said, "There's your fish emulsion. That's how we used to do it." And now, and even after I left, and even after I left the college, I still have we made a MOU with them, and we keep the garden there because they use it as a teaching tool. And we got some scholarships to send some Native students through that program that wanted to build and possibly become market farmers. But then they use that garden as a teaching tool to kind of a roots of sustainability type of thing, of like, before there was sustainable ag, there was us, like, type of thing is what I used to, even as a student going through the program. I was working there, so I mean, one of the professors was my colleague, but he was like, "Oh, I learned just as much from you as you guys having you in class as you did us," because you just would be like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do this," and you'd chime in, "Yeah, we used to do that. We do this way," and taught them how to keep their squash bugs off their zucchini and stuff using ashes and stuff. And it's like, I never seen anything about our Osage people doing it, but I'd seen something about the Hopis using that down in the Southwest, spreading ashes around their garden. And I was like, here, try this. And it's like, I can't take credit for the Osage doing it, but it seems to work for these Hopi folks. So give it a shot. And they were like, yeah, that worked. And I was like, well, we weren't dumb. It's like it worked for somebody. So yeah, just different things like that. We would try different stuff. And so it was good, but then that was always my intent was always kind of well, you guys didn't invent that. We did that first. And just so you know, was kind of my thing.
I think that really speaks to the need for reclamation of indigenous agricultural practices too. We have a lot of cultural practices that have been sort of erased or sort of lost to some degree. And so I think that as so many people are doing this reclamation work, it can help to build better frameworks, I think, in the larger scheme.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions on the Q&A panel unless somebody wants to send one in really quickly. I guess I'll end by asking the two of you if you have any final remarks.
Well, it was really lovely to be here and to be able to share these things with you. And I know mine was pretty grounded in theory and texts. And so I'm really grateful for Ed for sharing what that looks like in practice and what all the different amazing types of things that can come from engaging in these relationships in meaningful and reciprocal ways. I am also interested in maybe thinking about how we can start to bring some of these practices to Mizzou and to maybe try to get an Indigenous garden or something like that set up here. So I would love to continue these conversations.
Well, I think those are great ideas. I'd love to see that. So I guess I'll end by thanking both of you for coming and sharing your insights with us. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming and participating in today's lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you.